Well, here we are, ready to start our nod to the past here. Not just with the authentic sliding equipment there at the back, got to have a Tiroler hat, haven't you? But also with some historic sleds. In the blue is local hero Manny Mahata, and he will be driving the first of our sleds down the track. Now they're coming in just below the Schlangengrube, so they won't have quite as much speed going into the Kreisel. But here with a 2000 Dresden, one of the last from the Dresden aircraft factory at Dresden Airport that then became the Dresden Bobsleigh manufacturers. And they're coming in here at the junior start, so the S is behind them, the first four corners, and so effectively dropping down here into the bend-away. Well, Manny Mahata, born and bred on this Königssee track. And now coaching, of course, but still knows exactly how to get down here. TV star Axel Schultz at the back, the former heavyweight boxer. And in this Dresden sled, this is very much kind of par for the course when Mahata was starting out, and still the Dresden sleds were pretty competitive up until the middle part of the teens. Just making sure that the track is clear, talking with the top and the bottom. And as you learn bobsleigh tracks, you don't just go off the top and hope. You learn from the bottom upwards. So you learn the last few corners, then you move a little bit further up, learn a few more with a bit more speed lower down, and gradually work your way up to the top of the track. So a good push start off. And incidentally, if you have never had a run in a bobsleigh on a track, you absolutely owe it to yourself to do so. So the taxi bob runs here in Königssee go from the main start, so by the time you get down to the S's there, you're going pretty quickly. Mahata with one hand off the D-rings. I'm sure that's filling his passengers with a whole heap of glory and joy as they get to the Kreisel. Holding a reasonable line around the middle of the Kreisel, hasn't got the speed that you would expect to see from a full race sled, but you are still building speed through that lower labyrinth, accelerating fast here. Top sleds will be doing 122 kilometers an hour, and he will be doing something around 115 through the speed trap. So you are not far away at all, less on the ragged edge. And Manny Mahata bringing the sled safely through to the finish, as you, and especially his passengers, would expect. Very popular figure here in Viesturs. And the fans here are very well aware of all the homegrown talent. Of course, they support everybody equally, but the Bavarians just a little more equally, perhaps. So Axel Schultz at the back trying to tuck his head around and get a good view down into this S's. And as you can see quite clearly, unlike racing bobsled brakemen, when you're in a sled like this as a passenger, you get a chance to have a good look around. You still feel the G-forces, so it's not always easy to get your head up. Well, next up, the sled of Peter Hintz. Hintz now coaching the Japanese team. And behind him, Tanagawa Toshiro, Uno Minori, and Dr. Markus Herzog. And you can see, again, this sled, another Dresden, but this is a 15-year-older model, so you've got a lower cowl, the high upright push bars on the side, and of course now we have the push bars that pull out to the side but snap away into the top of the cowl. And a lot more skiddy here, 900s in front, so he got a decent push start. Now, they will not have spent all night polishing their runners up, so the runners, possibly at best, may not be entirely rusty. And Peter Hintz, not entirely rusty either, knows this track well too. Good exit from the Kreisel. Taking care of his passengers down through the lower labyrinth, but he's dropped into the red behind Manny Mahata. Again, the sled older, and you wouldn't necessarily expect it to be quite as quick. I wouldn't say the same for Peter Hintz, obviously, because those words might get to him. But he and the Japanese team doing a great job in the World Cup this season, the first for his driver, Ryo Shinohara. Just a shame that we don't have a women's team as well. Yeah. See, in the old days, sleds, the crews used to bounce up and down in synchronicity to try and help them away from a standing start. That's where the bob in bobsleigh comes from. And they were doing it there to try and urge it up to the finish. Again, you can see it's a little more agricultural, a little less aerodynamic than the more modern Dresden. And we're going to go back through the years. So we're going to trace the sort of undo the development of bobsleigh, if you like. You can see the side push bars that snap in there. Bavarian colours on this 1970 Poddar. Poddar sleds built in Poland. And this is, again, a four-man bob. In these days, back in the 60s and 70s, particularly before the 70s, the two-man sleds weren't called two-man bobs. They were called Boblites, because they were small bobs. Go figure. Andre Langer, you'll have heard of him. One of Germany's bobsledding legends, with Katrina Kuhl, Renate de Paul and Victoria Meyer behind him. Looking a little apprehensive, possibly. They shouldn't be. They are in great, great hands. Again, you can see just really a bikini fairing on the front of this in motorcycling terms. A little cowl. It does sort of go down the side of the sled. See, the driver's push handle is on the left-hand side, just in the Bavarian blue and white, just before the edge of the cowl, just there. And the side handles as well. Brakeman would have pushed the rear handles and jump in last. But very much more exposed to the elements. And should you have crashed in one of these, then the thing you wanted most probably was to be flung out away from the machinery. So Andre Langer, you can see the sled very much more sideways. Shorter wheelbase, if you like, shorter between the front and rear axle. And these sleds less stable than the more modern ones. Driver and crew more exposed. They're also slower as a result of that, all that aerodynamic drag. 98.8, only a couple of kilometers an hour slower than the more modern sleds. And in the hands of a driver like Andre Langer, that's quite a ride. Now, it doesn't have the speed and may possibly need a bit of assistance to get all the way to the finish. No, he's going to make it up there. In fact, so much so, he's saying, hold on to the brakes now. Don't let go of the brakes. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, you saw Victoria in the background there throw her arms up in delight. Unfortunately, the brakes then come off and it starts to roll off back down the hill. Andre is holding the sled. You see there, just on the right-hand side, the driver's push, left-hand side driver's push bar, right of your picture. But again, look how close those push arms get to the wall. And that would have been very much the view of racing here in the 1970s. And they've actually got little backrests behind. You don't have those in a modern sled. Now stepping back again, this is a 1969 Poddar. The push handle pushes in there. And Brian Scheimer, the US coach, former bobsled driver, he always loves doing these historic races. He is always up for these. With behind him in his 69 Poddar, Dirk Behrendt, Jürgen Feldmann and Thomas Huber will be climbing in at the back. And again, a different generation. You can see Andre Langer's sled had the fully rounded cowl, but a very different aerodynamic look on the earlier Poddar, where it was formed around the driver's legs, essentially, and then around the steering gear. So it's got this sort of very Jaguar-y type power bulge down the center of the bonnet. Brian Scheimer needing a good push away here. Well, the runners haven't changed much. The technology hasn't changed much. These sleds still steered by D-rings. Notice though it's got a cutaway floor above the front runners that then drops down where the driver and crew sit in. So definitely a high nose aerodynamics going on there that will be familiar to modern Formula One fans. Drops into the S's. Manny Mahata with the fastest time so far. And Brian Scheimer, a very different look on this Poddar, and again, just trying to get the feel for the weight of the sled. Not easy, nobody's driven these sleds this week. They haven't practiced, they're just getting in and busking it. So it's just as well we've got some experienced drivers trying to hold it parallel through the three pressures of the Kreisel. Nice exit down through the labyrinth, that was nicely done, just one little nudge through. In the green over Manny Mahata in the newest of all the sleds, 100.8. Scheimer's got good speed here. Little skid, tap on the wall. Brian Scheimer, time to make a comeback, I don't know. Good run indeed in the 1969 Poddar four-man. Well, 1969, that is when this track opened. So this would have been absolutely state-of-the-art bobsledding at the time that Königsee's artificial ice track first opened for business 51 years ago. Brian, I'm sure, remembers that race quite well. Look at him working hard. Watch the runner tips. Just getting the feel for how much grip there is or isn't when you're on the straight is actually quite a good place to do it. Discovering that you've understeered or oversteered in the corners, not so much. Nice line down through the lower labyrinth. I'm sure that he will have absolutely planned that line. Alexander Resch in the yellow jacket in the back with Patrick Leitner, a multiple world and Olympic champion for Bavaria and Germany in doubles luge. And now one of everybody's favourites, the 1948 Fire-Arvin sled, driven by Donald Holstein. We've seen this a lot of times here. Donald also drives taxi bobs, spur bobs, and the old sleds in St. Moritz. So Fritz Fire-Arvin, a very successful bobsledder in his time and also sled builder, in the same way that Hans Hildebrand later was. And this is the type of sled featured in a film about the early days of bobsledding, Die Schwere Jungs, the heavy guys, when there was no all-up weight limit, and the team of 16, 18, 20-stone athletes was not unusual. Well, Holstein always pilots this sled beautifully. In the old days, as you can see, with a steering wheel. And I'm sure a lot of fans probably think that under the cows of a modern sled, because it looks a bit like a race car, you drive it with a steering wheel. In the old days, you did. Nowadays, you drive it like an old soapbox cart with cables that connect to the axle. Pull right to go right, pull left to go left. So Donald Holstein gets his passengers, Herzog Eberhard von Württemberg, Gabi Meyer and Tim Hosenfeld safely down. Not quite so much speed on board the older sled. And as you can see, aerodynamics of a brick outhouse. No aerodynamics at all, and indeed in those days the tracks would have been definitely not as shiny and icy as these. You would have been racing predominantly on hard-packed snow, much more like you find in the Finnish outruns of most tracks, with ice underneath and the snow to help give the runners some grip. And again, one of the things that you probably don't want to be doing in this sled is crashing. In 1948, state of the art. These days, it's a great relic to see, and Donald there does a great job driving it as well. And look inside, those two chassis rails, still the same way they build sleds these days, but with that webbing slung between in place of anything firm for seating. So we've seen the four-man sleds. Now we're going to see a couple of boblets, or two-man bobs, as we will call them these days. Thomas Schwab and Ivo Ferriani winning the World Championship Race of Champions back in 2017 when the Worlds were last here. Thomas Schwab, head of the German Sliding Federation, and Ivo Ferriani, the president of the International Bobsleigh and Skeleton Federation. And this is Thomas's sled that he's rescued, being driven by the great Latvian driver Zintis Ekmanis, himself a hugely successful driver and now the head of the Latvian Federation. Again, a Poddar two-man sled. And behind him, looking a little apprehensive, I have to say, is Dr. Tava Christina von Bismarck. No, I don't know either, but I'm assuming a direct line of relationship for the good doctor. And again, Zintis Ekmanis, a very safe pair of hands. The track in Sigulda was built by the USSR as a bobsleigh, skeleton and luge test track, actually luge to start with. And as a result, lots of their drivers came from Latvia. And in fact, the only gold medals won in the Olympic Games in bobsleigh by then the USSR was won by a Latvian driver rather than a Russian-born Russian. Zintis Ekmanis making this look a lot more modern than it really is. This sled from 1972, like the one that Brian Scheimer drove from 69. So again, state of the art for the early days here in Königssee, a half century ago. Whoa, brakes on. Again, look at the line in the Kreisel. It's about half a sled width, maybe a full sled width lower than we're seeing from our four-man sleds and our two-man sleds with modern speeds from the top. But again, Zintis knows how to get out of here. Watch the runner tips as he just chooses the line and then eases it away using that right-hand wall. A little build-up of ice, slithering his way through the doodles. Nicely done. And our final sled, driven by one of the all-time greats and with traditional German lederhosen. Is that Christoph? No, it's not. Christoph Langen will be driving this 1950 Sirupais. Now, Sergio Sirupais was a brakeman for the great Eugenio Monti, who then went on to build bobsleds, as you can probably see, in what amounted to little more than a smithy workshop. There is Christoph Langen, one of bobsleighing's all-time greats, never mind one of Germany's all-time greats, and a proud Bavarian. You can see the sprung Blumel steering wheel as seen on many classic cars of the period, just to absorb some of the impacts from the track. And Ralph Langen behind, I am reliably informed, is clambering in. Not an awful lot of room to spare. So Christoph and Ralph Langen, great opportunity for Christoph. I don't know, but I am assuming that Ralph is possibly a dad or an uncle, not sure. Again, you can see there is the steering mechanism, a pin in the center. If you ever built a soapbox cart of your own, you know basically how a bobsled works, but with runners instead of pram wheels. And again, very basic fundamentals. There you can see a handle on the side. Often there was a hole cut in the cowl to allow you to hold the cowl in the days when you pushed on the cowl before front push handles were introduced. And they were introduced by Eugenio Monti in the run-up to the 68 games in Grenoble to try and give him an quote, unfair advantage. Prince Leopold von Bayern there in the white jacket on the right-hand side. Poldi, not only a very successful saloon car racing driver and sports car racing driver, but he's tried his hand at the odd bobsleigh as well in historic races. So, no longer a kingdom Bavaria, but it is still a principality. Freistaat Bayern, in fact, is the technical term, a free state within the German Federation. So Leopold von Bayern, always great to have him around. Man who loves his racing in all forms. And the royal castle in the middle of town is, well, the princely castle is one of a number here in Bavaria. Of course, the last king of Bavaria, King Ludwig, responsible for such Gothic fantasies as the utterly outrageous and fabulous Neuschwanstein, the castle, in fact, that bankrupted the state. 500 years, continuous salt mining in the Bergwerke, in the Obersalzberg and Salzburg region. That's where Bavaria's fortunes came from. And Christoph making sure that Ralph has got his hands on the handles, but in fact Christoph, I think, is saying that I can do the braking myself. Well, there's some young bobsleigh fans, an awful lot here, from toddlers to babes in arms. Seen a lot of friends and family, seen a lot of sliders, former and current at the track here as well. Great to see Alexander Rödinger, who's recovering from surgery this year, will hopefully be back in harness for German bobsledding next year. Alex with his 3 young children and his wife here. The races are in town, why wouldn't you be coming? Again, you can see not only a car steering wheel, but actually a car steering box as well there. Track hold, this clearly is a bit of psychology here, I think, from Manny Mahata and Brian Scheimer to distract Christoph Langen a bit. He's trying to find out how much steering lock there is. As I said, none of these drivers have driven the sled before now. They didn't have a training run. And there is the sled of Brian Scheimer that is our current leader. And there's room here to get the sled into victory circle as well. Oh, low skates, away we go with the great Christoph Langen. I'm not sure how many times Christoph has ever driven a bobsled with a steering wheel. This is certainly the first time I've ever seen it. May well be the first time he's ever done it. And again, trying to figure out, A, how much steering is enough steering, and B, what on earth happens to the back of the sled. Of course, you can drive these possibly with your knees. Not that that's to be recommended. Keeping the line low. Yeah, wisely so, I think. He's already figured out the steering. You cannot stop old bobsledders being competitive. Trickling down through the middle of the labyrinth in time-approved fashion. Ralph on the back, trying to get a good view of proceedings while hanging on. There's not enough to hang on to there either. And Christoph Langen safely through Eckovand. A corner that none of these sleds will ever have seen. It was rebuilt after a fire this decade. And across the finish line, maybe almost just about with a little bit of assistance from behind. Get in there, guys. Well done. Well, there is never a day you stop learning, and that is another one for Christoph Langen. Another little bit of appreciation for our forerunners, as you see one of the all-time greats at the wheel of an antique with a steering wheel. And of course, again, Sir Pius in 1950 was pretty much state-of-the-art. Yeah. May not have been playing it for speed, but he certainly was playing it for the crowd. But here, no messing about. Christoph Langen very much focused on getting it out of the Kreisel. You don't want to crash in a modern bobsled. You certainly don't want to crash somebody else's near unique antique. So Brian Scheimer the fastest by 5/10 from Manny Mahata. Peter Hintz rounding off the podium ahead of Andre Lange, Donald Holstein, Zentis Ekmanis and Christoph Langen. And a great step back in time for the fans here, some of whom will never have seen even any of these elderly sleds racing. And for the likes of us who probably saw only maybe the most recent models. A great opportunity to be driven down the track in an antique by a legendary driver, and more entertainment for the crowd here in Königssee.